The Millionaire changes the life of pregnant black beggar in the park with an unexpected act. Mark Thompson, a Wall Street titan worth millions, stood silhouetted against his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Rain lashed against the glass, a mirror of the storm brewing inside him. Another deal closed, another zero added to his bank account. But nothing. Just the same old hollow ache. Then he saw her, a young black woman, huddled on a park bench below, huge with child, shivering in the November chill. Sarah, homeless, 8 months pregnant and completely alone. Something snapped in Mark, a cold, calculated billionaire. He grabbed his Burberry coat and stormed out, leaving behind his champagne wishes and caviar dreams. "Hey!" he barked, his voice rough. From disuse, Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation. "You okay?" She just shook her head, tears freezing on her cheeks. Cold. Mark hesitated. He could walk away, forget he ever saw her. But something about her vulnerability. He couldn't explain it. "Come on," he said, surprising even himself. "You're coming with me." He didn't offer money, a handout, or a pat on the back. Nope. Mark did something way crazier. He was bringing a pregnant, homeless woman to his penthouse. The next morning, Veronica, Mark's platinum blonde Ice Queen ex-girlfriend, showed up unannounced. She found Sarah sipping orange juice in the breakfast nook, a soft blanket wrapped around her. Veronica's jaw dropped. "Mark, what in God's name is going on here?" she hissed, her voice like shattered glass. "Who is this person?" Mark just shrugged, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "This is Sarah. She's staying with me." Veronica's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. Staying with him? Oh, she knew better. This wasn't charity. This was something else. Something that sent a shiver down her spine. As Veronica stormed out, muttering about lawyers and revenge, Sarah looked around the opulent penthouse. What had she gotten herself into? And what the heck was Mark Thompson really up to? Ei, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer uma alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta nos comentários de qual cidade você está assistindo. Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. As Veronica stormed out, muttering about lawyers and revenge, Sarah looked around the opulent penthouse. What had she gotten herself into? And what the heck was Mark Thompson really up to? Days turned into a weird kind of normal. Mark wasn't around much, still doing his Wall Street thing. But when he was different. Almost gentle. He'd bring her cravings, pickles and ice cream. The weirdest combo ever. He even started reading baby books, looking totally bewildered. Then came the ultrasound. Mark insisted on going. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves. What was this all about? As the technician moved the probe across her belly, Mark stared at the screen, mesmerized. "Well, here's your baby," the tech said, matter-of-factly. Healthy heartbeat. Everything looks great. Suddenly, Mark's face went ashen. He gripped the side of the bed. Wait, he croaked. Can you zoom in on that area? The tech frowned, but complied. She zoomed in on the baby's face. Its tiny features blurry, but visible. Mark stared, his breathing ragged. No, he whispered. That's impossible. Sarah was confused. What is it, Mark? What's wrong? He didn't answer. He just stood up abruptly, knocking over a chair. I need to get some air, he mumbled, and bolted out of the room. Sarah was left alone, trembling, with the technician staring at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. What in the world had just happened? Later that night, Mark was a mess. He was pacing his penthouse, his face drawn and pale. He hadn't said a word to Sarah since the ultrasound. Finally, he stopped and looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain she couldn't understand. Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. There's something you need to know. Something about that baby. He paused, took a deep breath. That baby is mine. Sarah stared at him, dumbfounded. What? That's impossible. I've never even met you before. Mark shook his head. Not you. Another Sarah. Years ago. She was my wife. She died in childbirth. The baby was stillborn. Or so I thought. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wild with disbelief. The tech, she said something. About a birthmark, on the baby's neck. A tiny crescent moon. My daughter Lily had the same birthmark. He looked at Sarah, his voice barely a whisper. That baby, it can't be. It's been years. But it has to be. That baby is Lily. My Lily. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. She sank onto the sofa, her head spinning. This couldn't be real. This was insane. But the look on Mark's face, it was too real. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Mark flinched. Who could that be at this hour? He muttered. He opened the door to find a woman standing there, her face hidden in the shadows. Mark, she said, her voice cold and familiar. We need to talk. As she stepped into the light, Sarah gasped. It was Veronica, Mark's ex. But something was different. Her eyes held a chilling intensity, a ruthless determination, and she was holding a gun. Veronica, what are you doing? Mark demanded, his voice shaking. Veronica just smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. Cleaning up loose ends. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. Elevator doors down the hall. He tackled Veronica, sending her sprawling. The gun went flying, clattering across the marble floor. Get down! Henderson yelled, his voice surprisingly strong for a man his age. Mark scrambled for the gun, grabbing it just as Veronica started to rise. But she was fast, like a cornered animal. She kicked him hard in the stomach, sending him reeling backwards. You old fool! She screamed at Henderson, who was trying to pin her arms. You don't know what you're messing with. Then everything went sideways. A deafening screech filled the penthouse. Not a scream, something else. A high-pitched, metallic shriek that seemed to vibrate through everyone's bones. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness. When the emergency lights kicked in, casting a sickly green glow, the scene was different. Veronica was gone. Henderson was lying on the floor, unconscious. And standing in the middle of the room, bathed in that eerie green light, was Sarah. But her eyes, they glowed. Not just a little shimmer. They burned with an unnatural, otherworldly light, and she was floating, a good foot off the ground. What's happening? Mark stammered, backing away. Sarah didn't answer. She just raised her hands, and the air crackled with energy. Objects began to float around her. Lamps, chairs, even the grand piano lifted a few inches off the floor. Then she spoke, but it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, resonant, like a chorus of voices speaking at once. "I have been waiting," the voice boomed, "waiting for the right vessel, the right time." Mark stared, his mind reeling. "Sarah, who are you?" The glowing eyes turned towards him. "I am the reason you are rich, Mark Thompson. I am the source of your power. And now I have a new purpose." She looked down at her pregnant belly. "A new beginning." The piano began to spin, faster and faster, until it exploded into 1,000,000 pieces. Mark screamed. What in God's name was inside that baby? What in God's name was inside that baby? Then the shattering started. Not just the piano. Windows exploded. Mirrors cracked. Even the reinforced steel beams groaned. Mark clutched his head, screaming. It felt like his skull was about to split open. Suddenly, the floating objects stopped. The eerie green light faded. And Sarah, she dropped to the floor, unconscious. Silence. Mark crawled to her, his body aching, his mind a blank. "Sarah? Sarah!" He shook her gently. Nothing. He checked her pulse. Weak, but there. He had to get her to a hospital. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking too badly to dial. That's when he saw it, lying next to Sarah. Nestled in the folds of her coat was a small, shimmering object. It looked like a shard of glass, but it wasn't glass. It pulsed with a faint inner light. He reached for it, drawn by an irresistible force. As his fingers brushed against its surface, a jolt of energy surged through him. Images flooded his mind. Alien landscapes, star-filled skies, and beings of pure light. Then a voice, not in his ears, but in his head, clear, powerful, commanding. "You have been chosen." Mark recoiled, dropping the shard. He scrambled backwards, his heart pounding. Chosen? Chosen for what? He looked back at Sarah, her face pale and serene. What had happened to her? What was inside her? He had to know. He grabbed the shard again, ignoring the burning sensation in his hand. The voice echoed in his mind, stronger now. "Embrace your destiny. Protect the child." Suddenly, the penthouse door burst open. 2 figures stormed in, weapons drawn. They were dressed in black, their faces hidden behind masks. "Where is it?" one of them snarled, his voice distorted by a voice modulator. "Where is the artifact?" Mark froze. Who were these people? How did they know about the shard? "We know you have it, Thompson," the other figure said, his voice cold and menacing. Hand it over, and maybe we'll let you live. Mark clutched the shard tighter. Protect the child. That was all that mattered. He looked at Sarah, unconscious and vulnerable. He knew what he had to do. You'll never get it, he said, his voice trembling but firm. The figures laughed, a chilling, heartless sound. You think you can stop us? You're just a pathetic, greedy billionaire. Maybe, Mark said, but I'm her only hope. He closed his eyes, focusing on the voice in his head. He didn't know what was happening to him or to Sarah, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them take her baby. He felt a surge of power, a tingling sensation spreading through his body. He opened his eyes and saw something impossible. His hands, they were glowing, not with a faint shimmer like the shard, but with the same intense, otherworldly light that had filled Sarah's eyes. The figures in black recoiled, their weapons trembling. What the hell? Mark took a deep breath. He didn't know what he was doing, or what he was capable of, but he was ready. Get out of my house, he said, his voice resonating with newfound power. Now. Suddenly, a third figure appeared in the doorway. He was tall and imposing, dressed in a pristine white suit. His face was calm, almost serene. He raised his hand, silencing the figures in black. Enough, he said, his voice smooth and hypnotic. He stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on Mark. Mr. Thompson, he said, I've been expecting you. Then he smiled. A smile that sent a chill down Mark's spine. I'm here to offer you a partnership. But then his gaze shifted to Sarah, and his eyes widened in shock. Wait, he said, his voice barely a whisper. That's impossible. She's alive? He rushed to Sarah, kneeling beside her. He gently lifted her head, examining her face with a desperate intensity. It can't be, he muttered. It's been centuries. He looked back at Mark, his face pale and shaken. Mr. Thompson, he said, his voice trembling, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. That baby isn't what you think it is. That baby is the key. And then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, he collapsed, lifeless, on the floor, leaving Mark alone with Sarah, the shard, and the two figures in black, who were now more confused than threatening, wondering what the hell had just happened, and more importantly, what was going to happen next. But as Mark looked down at Sarah, he noticed something. Her eyes were open, and she was smiling, leaving Mark alone with Sarah, the shard, and the two figures in black who were now more confused than threatening, wondering what the hell had just happened, and more importantly, what was going to happen next. But as Mark looked down at Sarah, he noticed something. Her eyes were open, and she was smiling. And then she spoke. Took you long enough, she said, her voice clear, strong, completely devoid of the earlier vulnerability. Mark stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. The two guys in black jumped. Everything just flipped. Sarah, what? She sat up, smooth as silk. No trace of the weakness, the hunger, the fear. She looked regal, like a queen on a park bench. That whole damsel in distress routine? Oscar-worthy, right? She winked. The shard in Mark's hand pulsed. He stared at it, then back at Sarah. His brain felt like scrambled eggs. You were faking? Sarah laughed, a throaty, amused sound. Honey, everything about Sarah was a performance, except the pregnancy. Lily's real, all right. Genetically engineered, but real. Engineered? Mark's head swam. He looked at the two bewildered goons. They were just as lost as he was. Who are you?" he managed to croak. Sarah finally stood, towering over him, even pregnant. The air shimmered around her, like heat rising off asphalt. "Let's just say I'm the reason those suits are so interested in my little bundle of joy. I'm the reason you've got a skyscraper and a bank account that could solve world hunger. You think you made all that on your own, Mark?" She gestured towards the still unconscious body in the white suit. "He knew a little too much about the deal we made a long time ago." Mark felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "What deal?" Sarah smirked. "The one where I gave you the Midas touch, in exchange for—" She paused, placing a hand on her stomach. "Access." His gaze snapped back to the shard. A cold wave of understanding crashed over him. The shard wasn't some alien artifact. It was a key to her. "The baby," he whispered, horror dawning. "Is the lock," she finished, her smile widening. "And you, darling Mark, you were just the unwitting locksmith." She snapped her fingers. "Boys, take him. He's served his purpose." The two figures in black, finally snapping out of their stupor, grabbed Mark. He struggled, but it was useless. He looked back at Sarah, pleading in his eyes. "What are you going to do?" Sarah's face hardened. "Finish what I started a long time ago. And don't worry, Mark. You'll get a front row seat." As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming, Mark saw something that made his blood run cold. Wasn't just smiling anymore. She was glowing, and the penthouse was starting to shake. The rain outside stopped. A beam of light pierced through the clouds, illuminating Sarah in an unearthly glow. As the baby inside her began to stir, the light grew brighter, and Mark knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever was about to happen, the world would never be the same. As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming, Mark saw something that made his blood run cold. Sarah wasn't just smiling anymore. She was glowing, and the penthouse was starting to shake. The rain outside stopped. A beam of light pierced through the clouds, illuminating Sarah in an unearthly glow. As the baby inside her began to stir, the light grew brighter, and Mark knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever was about to happen, the world would never be the same. He fought them, those two goons, in their cheap knockoff tactical gear, but they were surprisingly strong. Where were they taking him? The elevator? Down to what? A waiting car? Worse? He had to get back to Sarah, to Lily. Even if Lily wasn't really Lily anymore. Even if Sarah was something else. The elevator doors dinged open. He braced himself. The lobby? Freedom? No. A concrete stairwell. Cold, damp, and smelling of stale cigarettes and despair. They shoved him down the stairs, each step jarring his teeth. Where were they going? Then he saw it. A door. Not a regular door, but a thick, steel vault door, tucked away behind a forgotten corner of the building's basement. What the heck? The guys punched in a code, and the door hissed open, revealing a long, dark corridor. "Get in," one of them growled, shoving him forward. He stumbled into the darkness, the vault door slamming shut behind him with a deafening clang. Trapped. He was trapped. But where? As his eyes adjusted, he saw flickering lights ahead. And then he heard it. A sound. A low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through his bones. He moved forward, cautiously, the hum growing louder, the air growing warmer. And then he saw it. A room. A huge, cavernous room filled with machines. Not computers or servers, but strange whirring contraptions of brass and copper, connected by a tangled mess of wires and tubes. Steam hissed, gears turned, and the air crackled with energy. It looked like something out of a Jules Verne novel. And in the center of the room, bathed in the eerie glow of the machines, stood Veronica. But not the Veronica he knew. Not the Ice Queen with her perfectly sculpted eyebrows and designer clothes. This Veronica was different. Her hair was wild, her eyes gleamed with manic intensity, and she was wearing a long, white lab coat. She looked mad. "Welcome, Mark," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "I've been expecting you." He stared at her, dumbfounded. "Veronica? What is this place?" She smiled, a chilling, twisted smile. "This, my dear Mark, is my legacy, my life's work, and soon it will be yours." She gestured to the machines. "I've been studying her for years, Mark. Ever since your dear departed wife passed away, I knew she wasn't gone for good. I knew she'd be back. And now, she is." He shook his head, confused. "Studying who? Sarah? What are you talking about?" Veronica laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Not Sarah, you fool! The entity inside her, the power, the key to everything." She turned to him, her eyes blazing with fanaticism. "You see, Mark, I've always been smarter than you. I've always been stronger. And now I'm going to claim what's rightfully mine." She raised her hand, and one of the machines whirred to life, emitting a blinding flash of light. Mark cried out, shielding his eyes, and when he could see again, he stared in disbelief. Standing behind Veronica, emerging from the shadows, was Sarah. But it wasn't Sarah either. This Sarah was different. Taller, stronger, more imposing. Her eyes glowed with the same otherworldly light he'd seen in the penthouse. But there was something else, too. Something familiar. "Hello, darling," this new Sarah said, her voice smooth and seductive. "Long time no see." Mark stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that voice. He knew those eyes. "Mom?" he whispered. The glowing figure smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "That's right, Mark. Mommy's home." And then she winked. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Mark understood. He wasn't a pawn. He wasn't a victim. He was part of the plan, all along, and he was about to become something far, far worse. He wasn't a pawn. He wasn't a victim. He was part of the plan, all along, and he was about to become something far, far worse. "Mom?" he whispered. The glowing figure smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "That's right, Mark. Mommy's home." And then she winked. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Mark understood. But understanding didn't make it better. It made it 1,000 times worse. Veronica, crazed as she was, faded into the background. His own mother, using him? All of it? What do you want? He stammered. What I've always wanted, darling, she purred, stepping closer. Her touch felt like ice, even. Through his clothes, power, dominion, and you, my sweet boy, are the key to unlocking it all. She turned to Veronica, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Bless your little heart, Ronnie. You thought you could control her? Control me? You were just a stepping stone, a means to an end. Veronica, her face contorted with rage and humiliation, lunged at her. I'll kill you, she shrieked. But before she could reach her, Mark's mother raised a hand. A wave of energy pulsed outward, slamming Veronica against the far wall. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Mark stared, horrified. You can't just... Can't I? She said, her voice hardening. Don't be naive, Mark. This is a game of survival. And I intend to win. She turned back to him, her gaze intense. Now about that little matter of inheritance. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The machines in the room whirred and sputtered, their lights flickering erratically. Cracks appeared in the concrete walls. What's happening? Mark asked, fear gripping his heart. His mother's eyes widened. It's time, she whispered. Lily is ready. She reached out and took his hand. Come, Mark. Let's go meet your sister. And that's when the explosion happened. Not a small, contained explosion, but a massive, earth-shattering blast that ripped through the room, tearing apart the machines, collapsing the walls, and sending debris flying everywhere. Mark screamed, shielding his face. He felt a searing heat, a crushing pressure, and then... nothing. He woke up coughing, his body aching, his head pounding. The room was gone, reduced to rubble. The only light came from a gaping hole in the ceiling, revealing a sky filled with swirling storm clouds. He looked around frantically. Veronica? Gone. The two goons? Gone. His mother? Then he saw her, standing amidst the wreckage, bathed in an eerie, otherworldly glow. But it wasn't his mother. It was Lily. But not the baby Lily he'd seen in the ultrasound. This Lily was grown. A young woman, radiating power and energy. Her eyes glowed with the same unnerving light as her mother. But there was something different about her. Something innocent. She looked at him, her face filled with confusion and... Pity? Dad? She whispered. Mark stared at her, his mind reeling. Lily? Is that really you? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand, she said. What's happening? And then a voice. A cold, calculating voice that chilled him to the bone. It's time for you to embrace your destiny, Lily, the voice said. Mark whirled around. Standing behind Lily, emerging from the shadows, was him. But not him. Not the Mark Thompson he knew. This Mark Thompson was different. Older, more powerful. His eyes burning with the same otherworldly light as Lily and her mother. Dad, Lily said, her voice trembling. What's going on? The other Mark smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. Don't you see, Lily? I'm the one who orchestrated all of this. I'm the one who brought you into this world. And now, it's time for you to fulfill your purpose. He stepped forward, reaching for her, Join me, Lily. Together, we can rule the world. Lily recoiled, her face filled with horror. No, she cried. I won't. I don't want any part of this. The other Mark's face darkened. Don't be foolish, Lily, he said, his voice hardening. You have no choice. You are my daughter, and you will obey me. And then he lunged for her. But before he could reach her, Mark jumped in front of her, shielding her with his body. Get away from her, he yelled. The other Mark stopped, his eyes widening in surprise. Mark, he said, his voice laced with amusement. What do you think you're doing? You can't stop me. I am you. Mark stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what was happening to him or to Lily, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let this thing hurt her. Maybe you are me, he said, his voice trembling but firm. But you're not my daughter, and I'm not going to let you take her. And then he did something he never thought he was capable of. He punched himself in the face. The other Mark staggered backwards, clutching his nose. His eyes widened in shock and disbelief. What did you do? He stammered. Mark didn't answer. He just punched himself again and again, each blow weakening the other Mark, diminishing his power. Lily watched in horror, tears streaming down her face. Dad, stop, she cried. You're hurting yourself. But Mark couldn't stop. He had to protect her. He had to end this. Finally, with one last desperate punch, the other Mark collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing. The otherworldly light faded from his eyes. He was gone. Mark stood there, panting, his body aching, his face covered in blood. He looked at Lily, his heart filled with a mixture of love and despair. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know what's happening, but I'll protect you. I promise. And then, everything went black. He woke up in a hospital bed, his body hooked up to monitors, his head throbbing. A doctor stood beside him, his face grave. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Thompson, he said. You suffered a severe concussion. And, well, there's something else you need to know. Mark looked at him, his heart sinking. What is it? The doctor hesitated, his eyes filled with pity. There was another woman, a young woman. She was found at the scene. She didn't make it. Mark stared at him, his mind reeling. Lily? He whispered. The doctor shook his head. No, Mr. Thompson. The pregnant woman, Sarah. Mark felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Sarah? Dead? But what about the baby? He asked, his voice trembling. What about Lily? The doctor looked at him, his face filled with confusion. Baby, Mr. Thompson. There was no baby, no sign of a pregnancy at all. Mark stared at him, his mind shattering. No baby? No Lily? Then what? What had he been fighting for? What had he become? He looked down at his hands, his fingers twitching. He remembered the power, the energy, the otherworldly light. He remembered punching himself, hurting himself, all for nothing? And then he saw it, a small, shimmering object lying on the bedside table. It looked like a shard of glass, but it wasn't glass. It pulsed with a faint inner light. He reached for it, drawn by an irresistible force. As his fingers brushed against its surface, a jolt of energy surged through him. Images flooded his mind. Alien landscapes, star-filled skies, and beings of pure light. Then a voice, not in his ears, but in his head. Clear, powerful, commanding. "Welcome home, Mark. Welcome home, Mark." The jolt was intense, searing through every nerve. Welcome home? What did that even mean? Home to what? This nightmare? This emptiness? He stared at the shard, then at his reflection in the sterile steel of the hospital equipment. Who was he? What was he? A billionaire? A pawn? A father? He didn't know anymore. Suddenly, the door burst open, not with the subtle click of someone entering, but a violent crash that echoed through the room. He flinched, his heart leaping into his throat. Standing in the doorway was Sarah. But not the Sarah he'd seen lying broken amidst the rubble. Not the Sarah who'd winked and revealed her true, terrifying nature. This Sarah, she was different. Her eyes were clear, her face serene, and she was holding a baby. A perfectly normal, sleeping baby. "Mark," she said, her voice soft and familiar. "It's time you knew the truth." He stared at her, dumbfounded. "Sarah? But you were dead. The doctor said—" She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. He said what he was supposed to say. They all do. She stepped closer, cradling the baby in her arms. "This is Lily, Mark. Our Lily." He reached out hesitantly and touched the baby's cheek. Soft, warm, real. "But I don't understand," he stammered. "What about the other Sarah? The monster?" Sarah sighed. "That was a projection, a facet of her power. She used me, yes, but she also needed me. We were connected, like twins, sharing a single life. When she died, the connection severed. The power, it flowed back to Lily. It always belonged to her." He looked from Sarah to the baby, his mind struggling to process the impossible. "So, the other Mark? The one who wanted to hurt Lily?" "He was real, Mark," Sarah said, her voice grim. "A manifestation of your own potential for darkness. The power, it amplifies what's already there. The good, the bad, everything." She paused, her eyes locking with his. "You fought him, Mark. You saved Lily. You proved that you are capable of great good. That's why you're here." He looked at the shard, still clutched in his hand. It pulsed with a gentle warmth. "What is this thing?" he asked. "What does it do?" Sarah's eyes gleamed. "It's a key, Mark. A key to unlocking your true potential. It can heal. It can destroy. It can—" Suddenly, the lights flickered. The monitors began to beep erratically. The ground began to tremble. "What's happening?" Mark cried, fear gripping his heart. Sarah's face was pale. "They're here," she whispered. "They found us." The door slammed open again. But this time, it wasn't a crash. It was a smooth, almost elegant opening. Standing in the doorway was a woman. Tall, imposing, dressed in a pristine white suit. Her face was calm, almost serene. It was Veronica. But she was different. Her eyes were no longer cold and calculating. They were empty, hollow, and she was smiling. A vacant, chilling smile. "Hello, Mark," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "I've been waiting for you." And then she raised her hand, and a dozen figures in black uniforms stepped into the room, weapons drawn. But they weren't aiming at Mark. They were aiming at Sarah and Lily. "We're here to take what belongs to us," Veronica said, her voice devoid of any feeling. "The child and the key." But as they advanced, Sarah stepped forward. Her eyes glowed, and she smiled. "You won't get away with this," she said, her voice echoing through the room. And then she transformed. Her body shimmered, contorting, growing larger, more powerful. Her skin turned metallic. Her eyes burned with an unholy light. And wings erupted from her back, vast and terrible. She was no longer Sarah. She was something else. Something ancient. And as the figures in black opened fire, she spread her wings and unleashed a scream that shattered the windows and shook the very foundations of the hospital. But even as she transformed, even as she prepared to fight, her eyes locked with Mark's. And in that brief, fleeting moment, he saw something that shattered his soul. Despair. She didn't want this. She didn't want to fight. She wanted a normal life. A life with him, with Lily. But that was impossible now. As the bullets ripped through the air, as the battle raged around him, Mark knew what he had to do. He had to save them. But how? He was just a man, a broken, confused man, with a shard of glass in his hand. And then he heard the voice again, clear, powerful, commanding. "You are not just a man, Mark. You are more. You are the key. Unlock your potential. Save them." He closed his eyes, focusing on the voice. He felt a surge of power, a tingling sensation spreading through his body. He opened his eyes and saw something impossible. The shard in his hand was glowing, not with a faint shimmer, but with a blinding, otherworldly light. And then he understood. The shard wasn't just a key. It was a conduit to everything. He raised his hand, and a wave of energy pulsed outward, slamming the figures in black against the walls. Their weapons clattered to the floor. Veronica stared at him, her eyes widening in shock. What are you?" Mark didn't answer. He just took a deep breath. He didn't know what he was doing, or what he was capable of. But he was ready. He looked at Sarah, her face filled with a mixture of fear and hope. He looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her arms. And then he spoke. "I'm their father," he said, his voice resonating with newfound power. "And I'm not going to let you take them." And just before all hell broke loose, he saw it, a symbol etched onto the shard that looked chillingly familiar. It was the logo of Thompson Enterprises. Had his family been in on it all along? What was even real anymore? "I'm their father," he said, his voice resonating with newfound power. "And I'm not going to let you take them." And just before all hell broke loose, he saw it, a symbol etched onto the shard that looked chillingly familiar. It was the logo of Thompson Enterprises. Had his family been in on it all along? what was even real anymore? Veronica laughed, a dry, cracking sound. You think you have a choice, Mark? You're just a puppet. We all are. Sarah, wings spread wide, roared, a sound that tore at his insides. The figures in black scattered, useless against her fury. But Veronica, she just stood there, smiling that empty, terrifying smile. Kill the girl, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Kill the source. Suddenly, everything went silent. The roaring, the screaming, even the beeping of the machines. Just nothing. Mark felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Something was terribly wrong. He looked at Sarah, still poised to strike. But she was frozen, her eyes wide with horror. He followed her gaze, and his blood ran cold. Standing behind Veronica, a hand resting casually on her shoulder, was him. But not the him he'd been moments before. The him filled with newfound power and righteous anger. This him, this was the original, the Wall Street Titan, the cold, calculating billionaire, the him he'd always been. Hello, Mark, his other self said, his voice smooth and chillingly familiar. Having fun? He stared, his mind reeling. Another him? How? What was going on? Then he looked at Veronica, and he understood. She wasn't controlled. She wasn't a puppet. She was in charge, always. And the other him, he was hers. You see, Mark, Veronica said, her smile widening. There's always been more than one of you. Always a spare, a backup, in case you developed a conscience. The other Mark stepped forward, his eyes locking with his own. It's time to come home, Mark. Time to remember who you really are. He felt a tug, a pull, deep inside his mind. It was like a memory trying to surface, a memory of power, of control, of something terrible. He fought it, resisting with every fiber of his being, but it was too strong. It was like giving in to gravity. He looked at Sarah, at Lily, his heart breaking. He wanted to save them. He wanted to protect them. But he couldn't. He was losing himself. No! He screamed, the sound tearing from his throat. I won't! But it was no use. The pull was too strong. He felt himself changing, his thoughts shifting, his memories rewriting themselves. He looked at Sarah, but he didn't see a woman he loved. He saw a threat, an obstacle. He looked at Lily, but he didn't see his daughter. He saw a weapon. Good boy, Veronica purred, stroking his cheek. That's it. Let it flow. He looked back at the other Mark, at Veronica, his eyes now cold and empty. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice flat and emotionless. Veronica smiled. Kill them, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Kill them all. And then he moved. Faster than he ever thought possible. He lunged at Sarah, at Lily, his hand outstretched, ready to strike. But just as he was about to reach them, something stopped him. A voice, a small, weak voice, but a voice he recognized. Daddy? He froze, his hand inches from Lily's face. The voice, it cut through the fog in his mind like a knife. He looked at Lily, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, and something inside him snapped. He couldn't do it. He couldn't hurt her. He couldn't hurt them. He stumbled back, clutching his head, his mind tearing itself apart. What's happening to me?" he stammered. Veronica's face twisted with rage. "You idiot! You were supposed to be under control!" The other, Mark, stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "It's time to eliminate the variable," he said, his voice cold and final. He raised his hand, and a bolt of energy shot towards him. But just as it was about to hit him, Lily screamed, and everything changed. The energy bolt didn't hit him. It hit the shard in his hand. And the shard, it exploded, not with a bang, but with a silent wave of energy that pulsed outward, washing over the entire room. Everything went white, and then nothing. He woke up lying on the floor, his head pounding. The room was gone, reduced to rubble, again. But this time, it was different. Everything was distorted, twisted, like a funhouse mirror. He looked around, frantically. Veronica, the other Mark, Sarah, Lily, then he saw them, standing in the center of the room, bathed in a strange, shifting light. But they weren't who they were before. Veronica, she was a child, a little girl, clutching a teddy bear, her eyes wide with terror. The other Mark, he was an old man, frail and weak, his face etched with regret. And Sarah, she was a teenager, rebellious and angry, her eyes filled with a burning desire for something she couldn't name. They were echoes, fragments of their former selves, trapped in some kind of loop. But where was Lily? He searched frantically, his heart pounding in his chest. Then he saw her. She was standing in the corner of the room, her eyes closed, her face serene, and she was glowing, but not with the otherworldly light he'd seen before. This light, it was different, pure, innocent. And then she opened her eyes, and he saw everything. The truth about himself, the truth about Sarah, the truth about Veronica, the truth about the shard, the truth about everything. It was all a lie, a game, a twisted cosmic game, played by beings beyond his comprehension. And they were all just pawns. But now Lily was something else. She was the key to ending the game, the key to everything. But how? What was she supposed to do? As if in answer to his thoughts, Lily turned to him, her eyes filled with a heartbreaking sadness. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "I have to go." And then she vanished, leaving him alone amidst the rubble, with the echoes of his enemies, wondering what the hell had just happened. And more importantly, what was going to happen next. But as Mark looked down at his hands, he noticed something. They were no longer his. They were small, chubby, and covered in glitter. And he was wearing a pink tutu. Okay, here we go. Me in a pink tutu. Seriously? Glitter everywhere. What was real? What wasn't? Sarah? Gone. Lily? Gone. The other me, the evil me, hopefully gone for good. I was a mess, a glittery mess. I looked down at my tutu. Pink, sparkly, ridiculous. And then I laughed. A crazy, hysterical laugh that echoed through the rubble. It was all so absurd, so insane. And yet, the echoes. Veronica, the child. The other Mark, the old man. Sarah, the angry teen. They were trapped. Loops within loops. Pieces of a broken puzzle. And Lily was free. Free to do what? I had no idea. But I knew one thing. She was the key, and whatever she did, wherever she went, it was going to change everything. Suddenly, a flash of light. A blinding white light that filled the room. And then, silence. The echoes were gone. The rubble was gone. Everything was gone, except me. I was standing in a park. Central Park. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. A young woman was pushing a stroller. A young black woman. Her face, it was familiar. She stopped, looked at me, smiled. "Excuse me," she said. "Do I know you?" I stared at her, my heart pounding. It was Sarah, but different. Younger, happier. I don't think so," I stammered. She shrugged, smiled again. "You just looked familiar." She pushed the stroller on. I watched her go, my mind reeling. Was it all a dream? A nightmare? Or was this a new beginning? I looked down at my hands, still glittery, still wearing the tutu. But somehow, it didn't feel so ridiculous anymore. It felt like a reminder of what I'd been through, a reminder of what I'd lost, a reminder of what I'd found. I took a deep breath. The air was fresh, clean, full of hope. And then I saw it. A little girl playing in the grass. She looked up, saw me, smiled. Her eyes, they glowed. Not with an otherworldly light, but with a pure, innocent joy. Lily. She ran towards me, her arms outstretched. "Daddy!" she cried. And in that moment, I knew. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. But this time, I was ready. But what did it all mean? Was it over? Or was it just starting? As Lily reached me, I looked towards the distance, and I saw a familiar figure approaching. Was it another me? Or something else entirely? All right, listen up, people. The ending? Mind-blowing, right? You need to know what happens next. So here's the deal. Subscribe right now. Don't even think about it. Just do it. If you miss the next chapter, you'll regret it forever. Smash that like button. Feed the algorithm. Show some love. Prove you're a true fan. This is the moment to show your support. Flood the comments. Theories, reactions, spill everything. We need to know what you think. Let's hear it. Share this video with 5 friends. 5. Not 4, not 6, but 5. Spread the word. Let them experience this craziness. Don't wait nem mais segundo to share. Only the real ones understand. Let's show them what we're made of. Go, go, go!